So, no, I wouldn't say I have a passion for HR.
Welcome back to Human Resources for the People. It's a human capital revolution. Today we're going to be talking about firing someone in Portugal. This is from Vieira de Almeida and Associados. It's a law firm in Portugal. You can take a look for the link down below where I got this information. This is part of our long series on terminations and hirings throughout the world and what it looks like compared to the United States. It's comparative human resources, and I find it to be extremely insightful and interesting. To start us off with, this article describes employment relationships in Portugal as a almost permanent bond between the employer and employee, and that it's very hard and rare to fire someone in Portugal. It is still possible to terminate under just cause. You can, of course, do a disciplinary dismissal, which means you do something wrong in the workplace, you are disciplined and then terminated. But then you can also discipline based on unlawful conduct of the employee, redundancies, so layoffs, and for failure to adapt, which I think is an interesting term. When it's unlawful conduct, the idea is that you're breaking the bond. It's impossible to continue the employment relationship between the employee and the employer just because of how serious the unlawful conduct was. We've seen this previously with respect to sort of moral failings that have been considered for the employee to unable to return from them. What I find most interesting is that despite the fact that it is almost a permanent bond, even when you dismiss with disciplinary cause, there's no entitlement to notice or compensation. And I'll tell you, much of Europe does not appear that way. Much of Europe, you still pay out or give notice, sometimes as much as a month, even if you do something significantly wrong. Now, oftentimes those can be offset by just paying a sort of severance payment. But that's not required in Portugal, and I find that to be pretty interesting. Of course, in the United States, there is no severance payment required, and that's often a misnomer where there's this expectation of severance in the United States, but it doesn't have to be legally given, although it does happen quite frequently. The Works Council has to be involved with the termination proceeding in Portugal. I find that to be pretty interesting. Works councils are, famous throughout much of Europe, especially Nordic Europe, but here they don't really control it. They just prevent. They can give written opinions. You also don't have to go to government authorities, which might sound strange to you, but a lot of countries you do have to go to government authorities before terminating an employee. The interesting one here is if it concerns a pregnant or breastfeeding employee or employee on parental leave, the site must be consulted. The government authorities must be consulted, and they have the right to provide a binding opinion. Of course, the employee can challenge the dismissal in court within 2 months of the dismissal, and if the court rules that the dismissal is unlawful, the employee is entitled to receive compensation for salary and benefits lost while the lawsuit was pending. They could be reinstated to their job or receive compensation set by the court, depending on the specifics of the case. And that may result into seniority allowances for each year of service, as well as a minimum limit of 3 months' pay. They don't have to reinstate if the company's fewer than 10 employees or if the person is upper level senior management. If it's too disruptive to bring them back to the business, there's a certain payout that can be set by the court. Of course, in the United States, there are rights to challenge dismissals, mostly on the grounds of discrimination or retaliation, but they are few and far between, and most of the reinstatements or requests for reinstatements serve along those lines. Here's where it gets kind of at the height of government interference in the marketplace. Understand why it happens, but it seems difficult. So you can do a collective dismissal or a redundancy or a layoff, but you have to justify it by business-related reasons like shutting down departments or eliminating jobs or positions due to economic marketing or technological reasons. However, when you do that, you have to start talking to the employees' representatives, which is required if companies are under the collective bargaining agreements of of a specific union. But here's where it's interesting: they get the Ministry of Labor involved in order to reach an agreement on the matter, such as the possibility of avoiding redundancies or reducing the number of employees to be made redundant. So you have to work through the Ministry of Labor in order to make these decisions. And I think that results in some really bad economics. It results in a lot of dead weight, and it's really frustrating, I imagine. There's actually a process in place for with respect to criteria in layoffs or redundancies. And I think it's really interesting. The criteria is the worst performance review, good, worst academic or professional qualifications, higher salary, shorter length of service in the current post, and shorter length of service with the company. So presumably, if you knew all of these factors, you could sort of rank and see where you might fall in a layoff or redundancy because you know your current situation and the situations around you. They still do have to, even when they're doing individual layoffs, if the person is pregnant or breastfeeding or an employee on parental leave, they also have to be considered with respect to the dismissal authorization. And finally, of course, if you get laid off, you have to get paid for it. It's statutory. It's an agreement between the Portuguese government and the European Commission. Under those regulations, it varies from 12 days to 30 days salary, depending on the start date. So really not huge payments for dismissal, grand scheme, 2 weeks to a month. Frankly, most American companies, when they are doing severance, are giving quite a bit more than that when they are giving severance. Uh, and that means that they can execute a termination agreement at any time, which eliminates the need to justify the dismissal. So they could, I think, in theory, pay out a little bit more if a person decides to voluntarily take the layoff. But it has to, of course, be signed and everything else. So that's an interesting review for me of the Portuguese system and the Portuguese employment system. I think specifically the criterion
What do you think
surrounding
about today's video?
dismissal
Please
and layoffs,
comment down
I think is
below.
really interesting.
Like,
What would you like
share,
to
and
be judged? Let
subscribe.
me
It
know in the
really
comments down
helps out.
below.
And
Like,
I'll
share,
see
and
you on the
subscribe,
next
and we'll
one.
see you on the
Bye,
next video. Bye,
guys.
guys.